Hello, and welcome to another video in our module, Building Blocks of Life. Just to review briefly, in our first video, we began by talking about atoms and how atoms come together to form molecules. There are many different molecules that are important in life, like DNA, like carbohydrates, proteins, and lipids. All of these molecules here are found inside of our cells. In some previous videos, we talked about the different roles of cells. We talked about different kinds of cells. We talked about the different parts of cells and what they do. And this is all important because in our future videos, we're going to talk about how cells come together to form organs and how the organs are important for the health of our entire body. Today in this video, we're going to review a few more functions of cells. Particularly, we're going to talk a bit more about cell DNA, how our cells make copies of the DNA when they're going to divide, and we're going to talk about a few other topics that I'll continue discussing on the next slide. Alrighty, so I said we would talk about how cells manage their DNA, how cells make copies of the DNA, and how cells can divide to make more cells. We're also going to talk about what happens when the DNA gets damaged. What happens when the DNA gets broken? Also, we're going to talk about how cells can become old and worn out and different ways that cells can die. After discussing these topics, we're going to talk about fluid balance in the body and in cells. There are various reasons that can cause fluid to move into cells or fluid to move out of cells. And if too much fluid moves into cells or out of cells, this can cause a cell to die, or it can injure the cell. And so we will talk about why this happens and how cells help regulate the movement of fluid in and out of the cell membrane. We are also going to talk about some cellular adaptations, some ways that cells can change based on stress in their environment. And that is an overview of what we will discuss today. And just as a reminder for you, the videos and the practice materials on this website are only a tool to assist you in your education and your learning. Please make sure that when you are taking care of patients, you are following your local health authorities and caring for the patients within the scope of your training. All right, we're going to begin with some terminology. I'm going to give some definitions of some words for you. In a previous video, we talked about genes. And we mentioned that genes give instructions for your body on how to build proteins. You might remember that in your DNA, there are bases, the different molecules in the DNA, and they give a code. And when a protein in your cell comes, a specific protein called a polymerase, that protein can move along your DNA and it reads the letters. And every 3 letters tells it to use an amino acid and the polymerase will attach all these amino acids, and these will become a protein. And then the protein can do jobs in your body. We mentioned that genes are very important for making all of our bodies unique. For example, some people have brown eyes. Some people have blue eyes. This is affected by your genes. Your genes give instructions for your body, and they can make our bodies different. And if there are problems with the gene in our body, for example, maybe some genes are broken, they have mistakes, then when the protein is made, the protein might have mistakes. And then when the protein is working in our body, it can lead to bad things happening in the body. So that is a review of genes. And genes are small sections of your DNA that have information. Now in your body, there is a lot of DNA, and the DNA is kept organized. In the body, there are proteins called histones. Here I am coloring on some histones proteins, some histone proteins, and 8 of them all together make one big histone. And you can see the DNA. Here, I'll click on the laser pointer. You can see the DNA is wrapped around the histone. And this helps the DNA to be held compact and to be organized. Genes that are out here in between the histones are accessible so that if a polymerase comes, it can read the gene and it can make a protein. However, if the gene is on the histone, then it is trapped and the polymerase can't read it. So that gene will not be expressed. It won't be active in the body. And this helps your body control which genes are being used and which genes are not being used. Now, when we have DNA that is wrapped around histones and has other proteins, we call this chromatin. Chromatin. Sorry, I'll try to write that letter better. chromatin. And chromatin just means the DNA that is stored and organized in your body. And all that chromatin then is organized together into what we call chromosomes. And here is a depiction of what a chromosome might look like in the body. And that chromosome is made up of millions and millions of the bases that give the information. Millions and millions of pieces of information in that DNA that all goes into the chromosome and is wound together tightly, all bundled up inside the chromosome. All right, here we actually have a real image. It is taken with a microscope, and it is an image of what chromosomes look like in the body. To make this image, they had small molecules that attach onto pieces of DNA, and then it lights up so that under the microscope we can see different chromosomes. In almost every human cell in the body, there are 46 chromosomes. There are 23 pairs, and each pair has 2 copies. So for chromosome number 1, we have 2 copies. For chromosome number 2 in the body, there are 2 copies. And chromosome 3 also has 2 copies. All the way on to chromosome 22, there are 2 copies. For chromosome 23, this is the chromosome that determines if you are male or female. Women have 2 copies of chromosome X. One chromosome X and another chromosome X. For men, they only have 1 copy of chromosome X, and they have another one that is called chromosome Y. Chromosome Y. And we'll draw it in green here. And it is smaller than chromosome X. So for men, they have 1 chromosome X and 1 chromosome Y. Women have 2 copies of chromosome X. And that is what helps determine if you are male or if you are female. And so every normal human being has 2 copies of all 23 chromosomes. And so 2 copies of 23 chromosomes equals a total of 46 chromosomes in human cells. Here we have another diagram. You can see this is chromosome 1. There's 1 copy and another copy, chromosome 2. And then we get to the last chromosomes. These are the sex chromosomes that make you a man or a woman, that make you male or female. And so here we have chromosome X, and on the right you can see chromosome Y is smaller. So if a person had these chromosomes with X and Y, that makes them male. Do you remember what a female has? A female has 2 copies of X chromosome, but a male has X and Y. And both men and women have how many chromosomes? They have a total of 46. They have 2 copies of the 23, which makes a total of 46. Okay, now we are going to talk a bit more about cells. We are going to talk about the cell life cycle. So let's imagine that we are looking at human skin. Remember earlier, I drew a diagram of some cells, and we are going to pretend that all these cells are in your skin. Now, cells, they can be resting, or they can be growing and dividing to make new cells. Remember we talked about how a cell can make copies of its DNA, and then it can start to split into 2 cells. But remember, in the middle of each cell there is a nucleus. And in the nucleus there is the DNA for each cell. Remember? 46 chromosomes in the cell. And so what happens for a cell to divide and become 2 new cells? How does it make a copy of the DNA? That's what we're going to talk about in these next few slides. So imagine with me that we're looking at your skin here, and then something happens where you are injured, and a lot of your skin cells die. Now, in order to fix that, your cells in the skin, they will start to grow. And so they will be moving in the cell cycle. And they have names for the different steps. In G1, the cells are growing. In the S phase, the cells make a copy of the DNA. So every chromosome needs to have a copy. And then the cells continue to grow and they check to make sure the DNA is copied correctly, because we don't want to have mistakes in the DNA. And then the cell will split into two new cells. And then when there are new cells, the cells can either rest or they can keep moving in the cell cycle and divide again to make more and more cells. So by moving in the cell cycle, one cell can become two cells, and more cells. And the cells in this area where you were cut, they will divide like this to make more cells to help heal your injury. Now this process where cells will grow, make copies of the DNA, and then divide, that is called the cell cycle. To make copies of the DNA, you remember that in the DNA there is the genetic code. There are the molecules that have the code giving the cell the instructions it needs to follow. Now, when the cell splits, both of the new cells need to have their own copy of these instructions. So to make a copy, the DNA is pulled apart into two pieces. You can see here there's the two halves of the DNA, and they are pulled apart. And there is an enzyme that does this. Remember we talked about enzymes? Enzymes are proteins that help chemical reactions happen. So here we have an enzyme that I am drawing, and it is going to split apart the DNA. And then we'll have another enzyme here that moves along the DNA, and it will make a copy of the DNA. You can see here that now there is a copy on this strand of DNA, and on this one as well. See how there's a matching copy. And so this will be done by different enzymes that move along the DNA and help make copies. If there are mistakes, hopefully the enzymes will stop and they will help fix the mistake. However, sometimes there are mistakes that don't get caught, and then they get passed on to the next cell, and that next cell has a mistake in its DNA. All right, so you remember we talked about chromosomes. Here we have a chromosome, and chromosomes are a bunch of DNA. See here we have the DNA, and these are the base pairs with the code. The DNA is wound around histones. See the histones here? It's wound around, and it's all compacted together. It's compressed really small. And remember what we call DNA that's wound up with chromosomes? We call it chromatin. And when the chromatin is all wound up and organized into these shapes, we call this a chromosome. Now actually it is still called a chromosome even when it is open, but a chromosome, it helps us remember where the genes are. Because in the body, remember we have 40 6 copies of the chromosomes. And so in our next slide, we're going to talk about how the cell makes copies of the chromosomes and gives one copy to each cell when the cells divide. Here we have a diagram of chromosomes. So this is a diagram of a regular chromosome. In the chromosome, there is all the DNA wound up really small. And somewhere close to the middle, there's this structure called a centromere. And here's a centromere, right? Centromere. And that centromere is important for helping to organize the chromosomes. Now these chromosomes, they are copies of each other. So they each have the same genes on them. Maybe there's a gene for the color to affect the color of your eyes. And then there is a gene that affects how tall you are. And then there's a gene that affects the color of your hair. Right? These chromosomes, here they are a pair. And there are 23 pairs of the chromosomes. And so that makes 46 in total. Now when the DNA is copied, the chromosomes look like this. See how this blue chromosome here on the left, it now has 2 copies, one here and one here, and it's attached in the middle by that centromere. And the pink chromosome now has 2 copies, one here and one here. And when there are the 2 copies, like this, they call them sister chromatids, like they are sisters of each other. And they have the same copies of the genes. Now I'm going to walk you through the steps of how the cell divides and gives one copy of the chromosome to each cell. There's a lot in this diagram, but don't worry, you don't have to remember all the details. Just try to focus on the bigger picture, the main ideas. So here we have a cell and it is starting to grow. See G1, this is part of the cell cycle. And they have here 2 chromosomes in red and 2 chromosomes in purple. Now the cell is growing and it gets to S phase. Remember, S is where the copies are made. And we can see here that now there are 2 copies. See, the purple has 2 copies, the small purple has 2 copies, the big red one has 2 copies, and the small red one has 2 copies. And in the middle, they are attached by the centromere that helps organize it. Now the cell continues and it grows even more, and we have these structures. These structures here will help to grab onto all the chromosomes, and then see how all the chromosomes are lined up in the middle. And you can see there are the 2 sister chromatids, the copies, one on one side, one on the other side. And then it will split right down the middle. Oh, that was a bad drawing. Then the chromatids will split down the middle. And one copy will go to this side, and one copy will go to the other side. So you can see here one copy of the chromosomes goes here, and the other copy of the chromosomes goes there, and then the cell is going to split. This will become one new cell, and that will become a new cell. See here it's starting to split. And now we have 2 new cells, and see how each cell has in the nucleus in the nucleus, it has a copy of the DNA. And that's how each cell can have a copy of the important DNA with the genes that it needs to live. Now this process where a cell makes a copy of itself and each copy has all the DNA, that is called mitosis. You can see here in the middle, mitosis. M-I-T-O-S-I-S. Now after this, we're going to talk about another process that is similar, and I don't want you to get confused. This one is called mitosis, and the other process is called meiosis. I have here another diagram showing mitosis. You can see here on the left, we have a cell, and can you see the nucleus? Here is the nucleus, and inside there is lots of DNA. And the DNA is all spread out and mixed together. But then, now the cell wants to divide. So the DNA gets all organized into chromosomes. Remember, we talked about the chromosomes? And in the middle of the chromosome, we have the centromere. So you can see in this picture here, now the DNA is getting all organized into chromosomes. And then there are copies of the chromosome. So here in the middle, it's hard to see, but there's a centromere. And the centromere is holding together two sister chromatids. Sorry, I wanted that to be red. The centromere is holding together two sister chromatids. Then the next step over here, the chromosomes are all lined up, and then it gets split down the middle, and one copy goes to this cell, the other copy goes to the other cell, and now we have two new cells, and each one has all the DNA that it needs to live. This is how cells split apart and make copies of themselves. And do you remember what it is called? It is called mitosis. Here are some real images of cells that are dividing by mitosis. I just wanted to show these to you so you can see that this is something we can see under the microscope. So in this image, you can see here there is the DNA lined up in the middle of the cell. You can see all the chromosomes. And then here, see how it is being split down the middle? And one copy of the DNA goes to one side and one copy goes to the other side. That is how new cells are made. Here, the DNA is all open and mixed together inside of the nucleus of the cell. And here, this is the cell wall, the cell membrane. Here is another picture up close. So we can see here in the middle, we have the nucleus, and inside the nucleus, the DNA is all mixed around. But here we have the chromosomes, and one copy goes to this side, one to the other, and that's how we make two new cells. And each cell is the same. Each cell has the same copy of the original DNA. Kind of like if you went to the copy shop and you made a photocopy of a piece of paper. If you make 2 copies, both of the copies should look the same. And that's what mitosis is like. In contrast to mitosis, there is another process that I said could be a little confusing. This one is called meiosis. So we have mitosis and we have meiosis. In mitosis, here on the right, both copies are the same. Like if you go to the copy shop and make 2 copies of your piece of paper. In meiosis on the left, the copies are different. It's like you mixed the letters together and scrambled them up a bit. And so I'll explain now how meiosis works. Meiosis is important for reproduction. This is how, when you were born, you have some genes from your mom and some genes from your dad. And so this is what happens. Your mom, she made a cell called an egg cell. And to make that cell, she started off with her own DNA. So this is a cell with her DNA. And you see how the cell made copies. So right, there is one copy, and another copy. And this chromosome here has one copy and another copy. And this chromosome also has one copy and another copy, called sister chromatids. And then the matching chromosomes, they line up with each other. See how this matching chromosome, maybe it is chromosome number 1. Both copies of chromosome 1 come together and line up. Then maybe this is chromosome 2. And both copies of chromosome 2 come together and they line up. And then this is what makes meiosis special. You see here how the chromosomes start to swap genes back and forth. See how here there is some of the gray chromosome moved onto the pink one, and some of the pink chromosome moved onto the gray one. And so now the genes are swapped. And here, some of the genes from the pink chromosome moved to the gray one, and vice versa. So now we have new combinations of genes. And then that cell splits, and it sends one copy of the chromosomes to one cell and another copy to the other. And then you see here there are still the 2 sister chromatids. So then the chromatids split apart down the middle, like that, and one copy goes here and one copy goes here. So I guess the first time when they were split, one set of chromosomes goes to one cell and one set goes to the other. And then the set split in half, and one sister chromatid goes here and the other sister chromatid goes there. But every copy is actually unique. Every copy is different because when the genes were mixed up, every new cell gets a different combination of the genes. And this is important. This is how one set of parents, one mother and one father, can have many kids and all the kids are different. Because every child got a new combination of genes that came from the parents. And so this example here, this is how mom might make an egg cell. And in the egg cell, we have different chromosomes that have a combination of the different genes. And then dad follows the same steps. And he will make sperm cells and in the sperm cells, the cells have different combinations of his genes. Now, you remember in a regular cell, there are 46 copies of chromosomes. But after meiosis, you only end up with 23 in each one. Whoops. So in dad's sperm cell, there are 23 chromosomes, and in mom's egg cell, there are 23. And when they come together, they make one cell that has 46. And 46 is what we need to be a living human being. And so that is how you got 46 chromosomes from your mom and from your dad. And it was a unique combination of their genes. Your mom, she mixed up some of her genes and gave you half of her genes, 23 from the 46. And your dad did the same thing. He mixed up some of his genes and he gave you 23 from his 46. And so you got 23 from mom, 23 from mom down here, and 23 from dad, and that makes 46 for you. Now this process where the genes are mixed up and then split apart, that is called meiosis. And meiosis is important for reproduction. That is how we can have kids that share DNA from both mom and dad. But normally in the body, when cells divide, it is almost always mitosis. That is where each cell gets the same copy. Each cell is the same. Okay, we're moving on to a different topic now. We're going to talk about ways our DNA can be damaged. You remember that our DNA has our genes. Right, so one section of the DNA has the code for our genes. Now, there are different things that can hurt our genes. For example, you see here certain types of electromagnetic radiation, certain types of light, like from X-rays can hurt our DNA. So maybe you have seen where someone will go to the doctor and they will take a special picture of their bones where they shoot X-rays through the body and then you can see their bones. Now, when X-rays hit DNA, they can break it. They can break the DNA in half. Now, luckily, your body has lots of strategies to try to fix your DNA. And so hopefully the DNA can be fixed and you will be okay. But unfortunately, sometimes when the X-rays come and they break part of your DNA, your body doesn't fix it correctly. And then maybe your gene will be broken. So maybe this part of your gene is good, but then there will be a part of the gene that is wrong. And so that part of the gene that is wrong, that can cause problems for you. Now, there are other things that can damage DNA. For example, too much sunlight, especially UV light. UV light. UV stands for ultraviolet light. So maybe you have seen people get a sunburn, or maybe you have got a sunburn yourself. That is when there is so much sunlight that comes to the DNA and it causes damage to the DNA. And then that damage sometimes doesn't get fixed. Hopefully your body will fix it, but if too much damage happens, then that can actually lead the cell to recognize that its DNA is now too broken, and the cell will die. And that helps make sure that the cell doesn't keep making new cells with bad copies of DNA. Because if the cell keeps making copies with bad DNA, that can lead to cancer. So your body will first try to fix the mistakes. But if it can't fix it, then the cell might need to die. And the cell will kill itself. That is called apoptosis. Apoptosis, where the cell will kill itself to get rid of the bad DNA from your body. Okay. There are other factors that can hurt the DNA in your cells. Maybe you have heard people say that you shouldn't smoke. That you shouldn't smoke cigarettes because this can cause cancer. Oh, sorry, I accidentally clicked to my next slide. But maybe you have heard people say that you shouldn't smoke cigarettes because the cigarettes can cause cancer. And that is true. If you smoke, all that smoke has chemicals, and those chemicals, they are toxic to your DNA. And so they can damage the DNA. Now your enzymes in the body, they will come and they will try to fix the broken parts of your DNA. Right? They'll try to fix it. But sometimes they still make mistakes or they don't fix it correctly. And then now there are mistakes in your DNA. Also, certain toxins can hurt your DNA. Certain toxins in the environment, or maybe foods that we eat. And also lots of inflammation. If you are really sick a lot, or you have lots of infection, and there are your immune cells, they release chemicals to try to kill the bad bacteria, right? Maybe we have some bacteria in your body that are infecting you. And your immune cells, they release a lot of chemicals to try to hurt them and kill them. Those chemicals can also sometimes hurt your own DNA as well. And then that leads to more mistakes in your DNA. And remember, if there are too many mistakes in your DNA, either the cell will try to self-destruct, it will try to kill itself to get rid of the bad DNA, or it might eventually form cancer. Now we will talk about this slide. On the left, I have an example of cancer. This is a type of skin cancer called melanoma. You remember earlier I have drawn some examples of skin cells. Now, have you ever wondered why some people have light skin and some people have dark skin? Right? Some people, their skin is lighter color. Some people have more medium, like brown skin, and other people have very dark skin, very dark brown skin. And the dark color helps protect you from sunlight. In your skin, there are cells called melanocytes, and they make this dark color that goes into your skin to help protect you from the sunshine. Because remember, too much sunlight can hurt your DNA. However, imagine we have someone named Bob, and Bob likes to play at the ocean a lot. And when he was a kid, he really liked to swim in the ocean. But when he was swimming in the ocean, he got a lot of sunlight and he got sunburn many times. Right? He had a lot of damage to his skin from the sun. And so all this sunlight is coming to affect his skin cells here. And these dark cells, these are the melanocytes. If too much sunlight gets to those melanocytes, it can hurt the DNA inside those cells, and they can become cancer. And when they have the broken DNA and they keep growing and growing like they're not supposed to, these cells can grow and they can spread around your body. And that is what is happening in this picture here. These are melanocytes. They are cells that normally make the brown color in your skin. However, they have probably been damaged by lots of sunlight. And the sunlight caused damage to the DNA. And now those cells are broken. And so they keep growing and growing and growing, and they spread around the body, and that is cancer. And when they spread to too many places and they start growing in the wrong places in your body, that can cause lots of symptoms and it can even kill you. And that is how you can die from cancer. So this helps you understand why it is so important that we protect ourselves from harmful substances or harmful exposures that can damage the DNA in our cells. For example, that's why doctors want people to avoid smoking. It's why we don't want people to be smoking. And it's why we don't want people drinking too much alcohol. Because these things cause damage to DNA in cells. And there are many other things too. Cooking, if you are cooking with a fire inside your house and your house has lots of smoke in it, that smoke also, when you breathe it into your lungs, can damage the DNA in your lungs, and those cells can be injured, and it can also increase your risk of cancer. And it's important for people to protect their skin from too much sun, because if you get sunburn a lot, that will increase your risk of skin cancer. Now, as cells age, they keep making copies of the DNA. Remember we talked about how the cells, they will make copies of the DNA? Oop. And then they will split, right? So each one gets a copy. Over time, though, when the cells keep splitting and splitting again and again, the DNA actually gets a little bit shorter. because it's hard to copy the very end of the chromosomes. This part of the chromosome at the end, they're called telomeres. Telomere. Now, some special cells in your body, like the cells, like your stem cells, or I guess particularly your germline cells, they have telomeres, so even when they keep dividing and the chromosomes get shorter, they can build them back so they can get longer again. But a lot of cells in your body, as you get older, your chromosomes get shorter and shorter until eventually you run out of telomeres. They're all gone. And then your cell can't divide anymore, right? And so that makes it so your body has a harder time healing, and your body has a harder time being healthy, right? Remember we talked about how if you get injured, like your skin cells got injured, they might need to divide so they can grow back. But when you're older, it's harder for your cells to grow and to divide because the telomeres are shorter. And so this means that your wounds heal more slowly. It means that your immune system is weaker because the immune cells cannot divide as well, so you have fewer immune cells to fight infections. And it also can make the organs in your body get weaker because the cells, when you were younger, they could divide and keep making copies to keep the organs strong. But as you get older, cells are getting worn out and dying, but it's harder to make new copies to replace them. So the organ, it gets weaker. So these are some factors that affect aging. There are other factors as well. Remember we talked about inflammation and how there are chemicals in the body with inflammation. And these chemicals can help kill bacteria, but the chemicals, they can also damage your DNA. And so this can cause cells to wear out faster. Also, we've talked previously about the mitochondria in cells that make the energy. And as you get older, those can wear out and they can't make as much energy for you. So there are lots of things that happen over time that eventually cause cells to become weaker and to be less strong when you're older. But that's why your body has special cells called the germ cells, and they have a special enzyme that can help fix the telomeres. It can make new telomeres for your cells so that the DNA can stay long enough for the germ cells to divide. And so from these germ cells, you will pass that on to your kids. So your kids can have a fresh copy of DNA when they are born. Now, there are some things you might wonder about. You might wonder, well, why don't all my cells have this enzyme here, right? Why don't all my cells have this enzyme, telomerase, to build up the chromosomes so my cells can keep dividing forever and ever? However, the problem with that is, remember, as we go through our life, whether from chemicals or from the sunlight or from inflammation or just mistakes in our body, we get more and more errors in the DNA, right? These purple dots I'm using to represent mistakes in the DNA. So if our cells can always keep dividing and dividing forever, then eventually they will have too many mistakes in the DNA and they will turn into, they can turn into cancer cells. And so that's why our body has a limit, so that if a cell is dividing too many times, then it is stopped from dividing more to help stop it from growing and growing forever to become a tumor in your body. All right, now we're moving on to one of our last subjects in this video. We are going to talk about how fluid moves in and out of cells. You might remember earlier we talked about electrolytes. Remember that electrolytes, they are atoms and molecules in the body that have electric charge. Remember we talked about the hydrogen atom. There's the nucleus, and then there's the electron. But if that electron gets taken away, then we are left with the nucleus, and it has a positive charge. So there's lots of electrolytes in the body, and some of them have a positive charge and some have a negative charge. Now you might not know this, but water actually likes to be with more electrolytes and with more dissolved particles. So if there are lots of electrolytes outside of a cell, if we just keep adding lots of electrolytes outside the cell, then water will move out the cell. And that will make the cell get smaller. However, if we have too many electrolytes inside the cell, or let's say we take away the electrolytes outside the cell, if we take a lot of them away, so now there's very few electrolytes out here, then the water will want to move into the cell to be with the electrolytes there. And you might think, oh, maybe this is good. Now the cell has lots of water. But this actually gives the cell too much water, and it will swell up bigger and bigger until the cell will break open. It will pop. And then the cell will die. And so it's important to understand about electrolytes in the body and the process of osmosis. So osmosis is what we call it when water moves towards the electrolytes. Now I have here on the left a picture that I created with ChatGPT, and this picture shows a popular food in Cambodia. In Cambodia, it's popular to take duck eggs and then immerse them in a very salty solution, right? Do you remember what chemicals are in salt? There's different types of salt, but a very common type of salt that we like to use in cooking is sodium with chloride. And when sodium and chloride get into water, they split apart and they make electrolytes. They make the sodium ion and the chloride ion. And so when we have an egg in the water, it's kind of like a cell, like we just talked about. So I'll draw here for us an egg. So let's imagine here we have a large egg. And here's the yolk in the egg. I'll do it in yellow. When we put, if we put an egg in very salty water that has lots of the sodium, lots of chloride, then the water that is inside the egg will get pulled out because it will move towards those electrolytes. To make it easier to see, I'm going to get rid of this. So the water gets pulled out the egg. And then inside the egg, it gets shriveled up and it gets more dry. And so maybe you've noticed this when you've eaten the eggs that were put in the salt water, they kind of shrivel up. However, if instead we put the eggs in fresh water with no salt at all, then the water will want to move into the egg. And this is because inside of the egg there are cells. Lots of cells. And the cells have their own electrolytes, right? Like sodium and potassium and chloride. Lots of different electrolytes. And so the water will get pulled in towards those electrolytes. Now you might ask, how do you stop water from moving into things or moving out? What do you have to do for it to be balanced? And we call that isotonic. If we have the same amount of electrolytes inside as we have outside, then the water is pulled equally inside and out, so it is balanced. And then it won't make the egg or the cell want to shrivel up or to swell bigger. It will just be neutral. This here is a little diagram that someone made to talk about osmolarity. And I apologize, the file name is very small here on the slides, but it is 0307osmosis.jpg by OpenStax. And we have here in the middle, we have a membrane that lets water pass through, but it blocks electrolytes. So you can see here, there's only a few electrolytes, the purple dots, or this could be other dissolved things like sugar, or maybe carbohydrates that are dissolved in the water. And so the water, we see, wants to move towards the electrolytes. And so now there's more water over here than on this side. And here's a diagram of how this can affect our cells. In this diagram, we see red blood cells. Red blood cells are in your blood. That's what makes your blood the color red. And they carry oxygen to your body. Now, have you ever seen a patient go to the hospital and then they get an IV where they put a needle into their arm and they give fluid to the patient? Right? Maybe imagine you go to the hospital because you have been vomiting a lot, or you've had diarrhea, so your body has lost a lot of water. And now they want to give you some fluid because you are dehydrated and you're very thirsty. If they give you water that is too salty, right? It has too much of the different electrolytes. If it has lots and lots of the electrolytes, then it will suck the water out your cells. And your cells will shrivel up like this. See here how the water is coming out of the cell and it is getting smaller, and that can hurt your cells. It can damage them. So we don't want to give the patients water that has too much of the salt. But also, we don't want to give patients pure water either. If we just give patients water without any salt in it, then the water will go into the cells and it will make the cells swell up bigger until they pop, until they're damaged. Now, if the cell doesn't burst all the way, maybe the cell will just be hurt a bit and it can recover. But if we put in too much free water, it can cause the cells to burst. They call this lysis. I'll write it again, lysis. So it can lyse your cells and cause them to burst open. And so that's, of course, that is bad. So that is why when patients come to the hospital, we usually give them 0.9% NaCl. Remember NaCl? Those are electrolytes. So we usually give the sick patients fluids that have some electrolytes in so that it is isotonic, it is balanced. If there is too much electrolytes or too much dissolved things like sugar in the water, then it will be hypertonic. Hyper means too much, and so there's too much salt or sugar, and that pulls the water out the cells. The opposite of hypertonic is hypotonic. Here we have hypotonic, and that means not enough, too little. And so if there's not enough salt, then all that water is going into the cells, and it can damage the cells. And just to remind you, we call this osmosis. Osmosis is when the water moves towards the electrolytes or the other substances that are dissolved in the water. Now I'm going to show you here, this is another diagram showing a cell membrane, the skin that goes around your cell. So imagine the cell membrane continues over here. Now outside of the cell, we have some electrolytes. And inside the cell, we have some electrolytes. It is normal to have lots of sodium outside of the cell and a lot of potassium inside the cell. And the cell keeps these in balance. You might remember that the cell uses ATP for energy. That ATP will go to proteins. It'll go to proteins in the membrane of your cell. And the membrane of your cell will move electrolytes across to the other side. So it could move some sodium out of the cell. And it can move potassium into the cell. And it can do this to help keep balance between the electrolytes. Now, if your cell runs out of energy, for example, maybe the cell doesn't get oxygen, then it loses that ATP, right? Because if there's no oxygen, the cell can't generate the energy. It can't undergo cellular respiration. So the cell loses the energy, and then it can't pump the electrolytes anymore, right? It can't pump the sodium in, or it can't pump sodium out, and it can't pump the potassium in. And so then the cell will swell up. The water will start to come into your cell, and then eventually that could even kill your cell, or it can damage it. And so that's why our cells, one of the reasons our cells constantly need energy, so they can help control where the electrolytes go. There are also many special purposes where your cells pump electrolytes across the cell membrane. For example, in your muscle cells, your muscles store calcium. And then when you want to move, the cell releases calcium inside the cell, and that calcium helps your muscles to move. Electrolytes are also very important in your heart. every time your heart beats, there are electrolytes that move across the cell membrane. And those electrolytes help your heart beat together so that all of your heart beats in the right way to pump blood. And so these are some reasons why electrolytes are very important in the body. If your body was running out of electrolytes, like let's say your body doesn't have enough potassium, or maybe your body is starting to get too much potassium, then this can affect your heart, because then maybe your heart stops pumping right because the electrolytes are out of balance. And so as we move forward in the modules, we will talk more about electrolytes and how special cells in your body use the electrolytes. In this slide, we're going to talk about changes that your cells can undergo to adapt to stress or to things in the environment. So I'm going to teach you some new words. On the top here, we have just some normal cells. There are different ways that our cells can change and respond to stress. The first one we call atrophy. Atrophy. And so atrophy is where the cells get smaller. You can see here there are 4 cells and here there are 4 cells, but the cells got smaller. So as an example, in our body, our muscles can atrophy. For myself, a few months ago, I was doing a lot more exercise. I was doing more running and strength exercises, and so my muscles were bigger. But during the last few months, I haven't been exercising as much. And so I feel like my muscles have gotten a bit smaller. Also, you might be taking care of patients, and those patients don't have good access to food, so they are not getting enough food to eat, or they are not getting enough protein. And protein is very important for muscles. So if their body doesn't have protein, doesn't have the nutrients, then the muscle cells can shrink and get smaller. And that is called atrophy. The next change we'll talk about is hypertrophy. That's the opposite of atrophy. That's where the cells get bigger. So see, there are 4 cells here, the same number, but each one got bigger. And so if I start to exercise more and I use my muscles a lot, my muscle cells will get bigger. And that will help them to be stronger. Lots of cells in the body can hypertrophy, not just muscle cells. And so sometimes this happens when there is more stress. Like if I'm lifting lots of weight every day, then my muscles are under a lot of stress, and that could help them to grow bigger. But they will also need nutrients to help them grow. I will have to eat good food. We'll talk about a different change now. This is called hyperplasia. Remember hyper means more or too much. So hyperplasia is when cells are growing in number. They're not getting bigger, but there's more and more cells growing. So we have more and more and more and more cells. Can you think of any examples of hyperplasia that we've talked about? Remember when I talked about getting a cut in your skin? So if these are all cells in your skin, and then you get a cut in your skin, and some of the cells die, then for the cut to heal, your body will grow more cells, and they will grow back. There are some situations, though, where cells can grow too much. And so in future videos, you will see examples where cells are growing in number because they are under stress. Another type of change that can happen is called metaplasia. And this is where the cells change. See here how these cells are more square shape, but these cells are round. And that is supposed to make you think of cells changing. And I'll give you an example. Inside your lungs, there's a special type of cell that helps keep your lungs clean. So when there is junk in your lungs, these lungs or these cells, they have long arms called cilia. And the cilia will move to help get the mucus and the bad stuff out of your lungs. However, if you smoke cigarettes, or maybe in your home you cook with a fire in your home and your home has lots of smoke every day and you are breathing all this smoke, then that smoke can come down in your lungs and it can hurt those cells. And eventually your body will change those cells and they can change to another kind of cell that is more protective against the smoke. See how these cells are in layers? And then when the smoke comes, it can hurt those cells, but the cells will protect you more because they're in layers. Now, you might think, oh, this is good. It helps protect me from the smoke. But this different type of cell doesn't have the arms, the little structures to help move the bad stuff out your lungs. So the bad stuff moves down into your lungs and it builds up, and this can make you sick and cause infections. And so this is why maybe you have met people who have smoked a lot of cigarettes or they had a lot of fire in their house, and now they cough a lot and they get infections in their lungs. And this is partly because they've had damage to their lungs and their lungs have changed, and now they can't clean out their lungs very well. So that was a real life example of metaplasia, where the original cells in your lungs, they change into a new kind of cell. And then our last example here that we will talk about is dysplasia. Dysplasia. And that is a bad change that happens to cells. In this example, we'll talk about a virus called human papilloma virus, or HPV. And this is a virus that can get passed between people when they have sex. And one reason we are particularly concerned about this virus is because when the virus is passed to a woman, to a female, then it can infect cells in the cervix. So imagine here I'm going to draw some cells in the cervix. And then we have the virus. I'm trying to draw little virus particles. And these virus particles come and they infect the cells. And then they change the DNA in those cells. And they change the cell cycle. Remember we talked about the cell cycle, how the cells will grow and then make a copy of the DNA, and they will grow more, and then they will divide to make new cells. Well, this virus here, this human papilloma virus, HPV, it goes inside the cells of the woman and it changes the DNA and it makes the cells keep going through the cell cycle. So they go through it and then they go through again and again and again and again until now the DNA has lots of mutations. It has lots of mistakes in the DNA. And that is called dysplasia. So see here, these cells are weird shapes. They're not normal cells. And if this keeps happening and there are too many mutations and mistakes in the DNA, then they can become cancer cells, where they keep growing and growing and they spread around the body. And that can be lethal, because when it becomes cancer, it won't stop. Remember the cell cycle? It will keep going around and around the cell cycle and growing until it spreads through the body, and that can kill someone. And so you might be wondering, well, how do we help these people? How do we help these people to not get the virus and to not get cancer? There are a few things we can do. For one thing, if you protect yourself to avoid sex, to avoid having sex that is not safe, like having sex with lots of people without any protection, if you can avoid that, then hopefully you can avoid getting the virus, right? Because if you are having sex with more and more people without any protection, like a condom or anything like that, you are increasing the risk that you could give someone HPV, or that you could get the HPV virus yourself. And then also, there is a vaccine, right? You can get an injection where they will inject a vaccine into your body so that your body can protect against this virus. So when the virus comes, your body can kill it. Here. Yeah, your body can kill the virus and get rid of it. And then that can help protect you so you don't get cancer. And then also, maybe a woman already has got the HPV virus, and so some of her cells are getting dysplasia. She can go to the doctor, and the doctor can do an exam and check the cells from the cervix under a microscope and could see if there is dysplasia. And if there is dysplasia, then the doctor can cut out some of those bad cells. The doctor could cut out some of those bad cells so that they don't become cancer in the future. So that is just an example I wanted to share with you so you can understand the importance of dysplasia. So just to review, these are normal cells. Atrophy is when they get smaller. Hypertrophy is when they get bigger. Hyperplasia is when they grow in number, so there's more and more cells. Metaplasia is when they change, maybe to a new kind of cell, like for people, for example, who are smoking or exposed to lots of smoke, cells in their lungs could change. And then there is also dysplasia, where bad things happen to the cells, and now the cells change into, they have messed up DNA. Their DNA is broken. And if that keeps going, it can become cancer. All right, on to our next slide. In this slide, we talk about different ways that cells can die. So you heard me talking earlier about how cells, they can have mutations or mistakes in the DNA. And eventually, those cells could become cancer. So how does your body protect against cancer? Well, your body uses a process called apoptosis to protect against cancer. So when the cell recognizes that in the DNA, in the nucleus, there's lots of mistakes. So I'll make that the nucleus, and then here's the cell. When the cell recognizes it, it goes through apoptosis. And apoptosis is what we see here on the right side. So inside the cell, there are lots of enzymes. Remember enzymes? They are proteins that do chemical reactions. And the cell releases these enzymes, they're activated, and they start to destroy everything inside the cell. They cut it up. So now everything in the cell is destroyed, and the cell will break apart into small pieces. So you can see there's still cell membrane around the pieces, and inside the cell we have the pieces of DNA and of proteins and other things inside the cells, or inside the pieces. And so when cells do this, it helps protect against cancer. And then later, other cells in your body can come. Other cells in your body can come, and they can take in and they can eat up these little pieces. They can take them in. And remember, we talked about the lysosome that has all the acid. It can take those to the lysosome and destroy them and recycle them. And this is a very clean way for your body to clean up when cells die, when they die from apoptosis. There is another way for cells to die, though, and this way is messier. So let's imagine that we have a cell here, and this cell, there's lots of things that could happen. Maybe it got exposed to some toxins that damaged the cell, or maybe there was no oxygen, right? Maybe the oxygen was stopped to the cell, and then suddenly that cell dies. Well, since the cell is dead, it can't activate the enzymes to go through apoptosis. Instead, that cell will slowly break down on its own, and it can break open. It can break open, and then all these pieces go around into the body. And when that happens, this is a bad sign in the body. It shows that, you know, something is causing your cells to die, whether it was that toxin, or maybe it was some bacteria that have infected your body, and now they are killing your cells. And so when that happens, other cells, they release proteins into the body that are like an alarm to say that there is danger. And other cells come and they release chemicals to try to destroy and clean up the pieces of the cells that are dead. So this causes inflammation in the body. This process where the cells die and they break open and there is inflammation, that is called necrosis. See down here on the left, necrosis. That is when a cell is killed by something outside of it. But when a cell dies from itself, like a cell kills its own self, that is called apoptosis. So if a cell recognizes that it has too many mistakes in its DNA, and the cell wants to get rid of itself and get rid of all its bad DNA, then the cell might go through apoptosis here. But if you had a burn, or you had a bad infection, or there was toxins, that could kill the cells quickly, and that can cause necrosis, where the cells break open and there's inflammation. All right, we are done with our video. Thank you for watching. I know this was a longer video. Just to review quickly, At the beginning, we started by talking about the DNA in cells, and we mentioned that this DNA is organized around around proteins called histones. See, it is wrapped around the histones, and all those histones in the DNA is organized into what we call a chromosome. We talked about how in the human body there are 2 copies each of 23 chromosomes, and that makes a total of 46 chromosomes. We talked about what makes someone male versus female. For a female, they have 2 copies of the X chromosome, but for a male, they have an X chromosome and a Y chromosome. Now, when cells divide and make copies of themselves, they have to make a copy of all their DNA, and then they will split apart and give 1 copy of the DNA to one cell and 1 copy to the other cell, and that is called mitosis. When this happens, both the new cells are the same. They each have the same DNA from the cell before. So that is like if you went to the copy shop and you made a photocopy of a piece of paper. You make 2 equal copies. Now there is a different process, and this is how new people come into the world. So your mom and your dad made special cells. Your mom made an egg cell and your dad made sperm cells. And so to do this, you start off with a regular cell, or I should say a cell that has 46 chromosomes, but then that cell divides and it divides again, and you end up with cells that only have 23 chromosomes. And so one of these cells from your mom joined with one of the cells from your dad. So here's a sperm cell from dad. Sorry, it's having a hard time drawing. One joined with the cell from dad, and then together 23 plus 23 makes 46, and that is how you have 46 chromosomes. 23 from mom and 23 from dad. And so this process is meiosis. And what makes meiosis so special is before the cells split, remember they mix up the DNA. The chromosomes swap genes between them, so that now all of these new little cells here, they are unique. They have a special combination of genes. And that's how, from the same parents, we can have many different kids that all have different DNA, and they all look different. So that process of making more cells with 23 chromosomes that are all unique, that is called meiosis. Then we talked about different types of damage that can happen to our DNA. We talked about how things like X-rays or too much sunlight or toxins and chemicals, like with smoking or drinking alcohol, right? Maybe this is supposed to be a can of alcohol. If we drink alcohol, smoke, or we are exposed to bad chemicals, or we have many infections, right? Maybe we have lots of infections from bacteria or other health conditions that cause inflammation. All of these things can cause damage to our DNA. So then there is damage to the DNA. Now, normally our body tries to use enzymes to check our DNA, and when they find problems, when they find mistakes, the enzymes try to fix it to make our DNA better. However, if there's too much damage or our body misses it, then those mistakes can stay in the DNA. And if there are too many mistakes in the DNA, then the cells can become bad because the cells don't follow instructions anymore. And then the cells will keep growing and growing. They'll keep growing and growing in the body and spread and become a tumor, and that is cancer. We talked about how as cells get older, at the end of the chromosomes, there are telomeres, and the telomeres get shorter. And so that means that when the cells get older, they have to stop dividing. But in certain special situations, like the cells that are used to be passed on to our kids, some of those, they can make new telomeres. And they can fix the telomeres so that our kids can have a fresh set of chromosomes to start their life with. Also, in certain types of cancer cells, the cancers can fix their telomeres, and this can help the cancer cells to keep growing and growing and growing and not stop and spread through the body. We talked about ways that cells can die. We talked about two main ways. One is where the cell kills itself. Maybe the cell recognizes that it has too many mistakes in the DNA, or there is another reason where the cell recognizes that it needs to die. So the cell releases enzymes inside that will break up and digest everything in the cell, and then the cell will break into lots of little pieces that can get cleaned up by your body. That process is called apoptosis, and it is a very clean process, and it doesn't cause lots of inflammation in the body. There is, though, a different way cells can die. This is called necrosis. Necrosis. And the other one is apoptosis. Now, in necrosis, that is when something from the outside hurts your cell, like there is toxins that come and hurt your cell, or there is bacteria that come and they hurt the cell, or maybe your cell gets too hot or too cold, or something happens that kills the cell. Now, after the cell is dead, then its cell membrane can break open, and all those pieces of the cell go around your body, and other cells in your body will recognize that there is danger because this cell died, and it will cause inflammation. And the inflammation can cause that area to be painful and to have swelling. And that is because your body knows there is danger there and is trying to clean up and fight whatever bad thing might be in that area. So that is necrosis. Necrosis has inflammation, but apoptosis does not have inflammation or has very little inflammation, and apoptosis is where cells kill themselves. After talking about the ways cells can die, we talked about osmosis. And remember that osmosis is where water wants to go towards the electrolytes and other things in the water, like maybe sugars or carbohydrates or other things, or proteins. Maybe there's some proteins in the water. And if there's too many electrolytes or sugars or proteins or other things outside the cell, this will pull water out of the cell. However, if we have too little electrolytes outside the cell, then the water will move into the cell because all cells have electrolytes inside, so the water will move in. And if too much water moves in, then the cell can swell bigger and bigger until it dies. So what do we do if a patient comes to the hospital and maybe they've had a lot of vomiting or diarrhea and we need to give them fluids? In that case, we want the fluid to be balanced. We want it to be isotonic so that when we add it, the water is not moving into the cells too much or out of the cells too much. We want it to be balanced. And then after that, we talked about cellular adaptations. We talked about ways the cells can respond to stress. And so one way that cells respond to stress is they can become bigger, that is hypertrophy, or they can become smaller, that is atrophy, or maybe they can grow in number to become lots of cells, that is hyperplasia, or they can change to a different kind of cell, that is metaplasia, like when people are smoking and it can change the cells in their lungs. And if too many bad things happen to the cell, especially the cell's DNA, then they can turn into bad cells that can become cancer, and we call this dysplasia. And that is a review of our presentation. So thank you for your attention. I know this was a long video. Remember, if you have any questions, or especially if you have any suggestions to make these videos better, please leave a comment below, and you can also reach out to me. You can send me an email. Just look at our contact page on the website, and I'm glad to help you study. Remember, you can always watch part of a video and come back later. Also, on your video player in the bottom right-hand corner, you should see an option like a gear where you can adjust the speed of the videos to make them faster or slower. So if I'm talking too quickly, you can make the video slower, or if you want to make it faster, then you can boost the speed of the video. And after my videos, I will have practice quizzes to help you study and remember what we have learned. and apply it to real life. Thank you for watching. In these slides here, we have a thank you to the people who made the images we used in this video.